Members, it's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting. The Secretariat, please invite the government representatives to join us. Members, please note that this subcommittee is to deal with a proposed resolution under Section 25 of the Fire Services Ordinance. It is to seek LegCo's approval for the enactment of the Fire Services Registered Fire Engineers Regulation in accordance with the positive vetting procedure. The proposed regulation provides for the implementation details of the RFE scheme. For the relevant details, please refer to the following documents. SBCR 1/2361/14, that's the LegCo brief. LC paper number LS 54/2025, the Legal Service Division 250/2025-02. That's the background brief prepared by the Legislative Council Secretariat. Before we commence the discussion, members, let's discuss whether we need to invite the public to provide views on the proposed regulation. If we only invite the public to provide written views, it will post a notice on the LegCo website and notify the 18 district councils in accordance with the usual practice. The submissions received will be circulated to members and forwarded to the administration for a consolidated written response. Yes, Mr. Tommy Cheung, followed by Mr. Stephen Ho. I suggest that we invite the public to provide written submissions. And then we can ask the administration to provide a written response. This RFE scheme may have an impact on the food businesses that intend to apply for a license. Last week we had a rather extensive consultation held by the FSD as well as the FEHD. We had a very in-depth discussion, and I don't hear any questions from the sector I represent in relation to this regulation. I heard from Dr. Lo Wai Kwok that there was an extensive consultation on his trade as well. This is not a new regulation. We're going to adopt a positive vetting approach for this regulation. I think it's enough to ask members of the public to provide views online or provide views in writing. Mr. Stephen Ho, I agree with Mr. Tommy Cheung. This regulation is not to completely revamp the application procedure, it's to provide an additional option so the public can opt for the original pathway and for ask for written submissions from the public. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok, I agree with the two members. I think it's enough to invite written submissions from the public. I think there's no need to hold a public hearing. Back in 2016, when we had the Fire Services Amendment Bill, all the way to the 1st of March 2017, it was passed that day, and it became the Fire subsidiary legislations. And we have asked for the subsidiary legislations for some 8 years. Finally, today we are carrying out the legislative exercise. and we're going to have the scheme implemented. And we are not going to see a full implementation. It will be implemented on a certain trade first. There's a need to have this scheme. It's been delayed for some time. And I understand that the fire services engineer field in general welcome the scheme. I think it's enough to invite written submissions from the public. Any other views from members? I see that most members think it's enough to invite written submissions from the public. If there are no other views, we will ask the public to provide written submissions as usual. We will first talk about the policy matters concerning the proposed regulation. Members, please declare interest before you speak. I am an independent non-executive director of a company. I'll first ask the Security Bureau to walk us through the paper, and then there will be a PowerPoint presentation from Mr. Yam. Members who'd like to speak, please press the Request to Speak button. Deputy Secretary, please. Thank you. Currently, the Fire Services Department, or the FSD, is the only authority that can provide fire safety risk assessment and the issue of certificates for the relevant parties. We suggest that we roll out this RFE scheme so that the market can provide fire safety risk assessment and certification services. After we roll out the scheme, the FSD will continue to provide the relevant services. License applicants may choose to have a registered engineer or the FSD complete the risk assessment procedure and the certification services. This will facilitate business operation as well as the development of fire engineer profession. The relevant service fees will be decided by the market concerning the fire engineering fees, and we will provide for a regulatory mechanism for the relevant matters. This new regulation will cover all the implementation details, including registration mechanism, duties of RFEs. There will be a disciplinary mechanism as well as an appeal mechanism. There will be codes of practice as well as guidelines to regulate RFEs as well. In general, supported the scheme. As we strive to implement the RFE scheme, we will enact new laws and we will also amend relevant laws. For example, we will enact the Fire Services Department Reports and Certificates Amendment Regulation 2025. Will have the Fire Services Registered Fire Engineers Fees Regulation and will amend the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance. The above three subsidiary legislations will adopt a negative vetting procedure. And so this subcommittee will focus on scrutinizing the Fire Services Registered Fire Engineers Regulation. The FSD, in response to the implementation of the scheme, has been consulting the relevant trade, including surveying, engineering, the construction sector, as well as the potential clients. Also, we have consulted trade associations, professional bodies, as well as the relevant stakeholders, including representatives from the FMB sector. We have listened to views of the relevant stakeholders. And this February and June, we consulted the panel on security as well as the panel on food safety and environmental hygiene, respectively, and we got the support from members of these two panels. As mentioned, the previous BC expressed support when it scrutinized the Fire Services Amendment Bill. We're now setting out the implementation details, and the details had the support of the members of the previous BC. After the scrutiny work is completed, the Secretary for Security will move a motion in LegCo, and the 1st of November this year will be the commencement date of the regulation, and the other subsidiary legislations will take effect on the same date. Now I'll have colleagues from the FSD to brief members on the details of the scheme. Mr. Horace Lam, Divisional Officer, please. Thank you. Currently, the FSD is the only authority that can provide fire safety risk assessment and certification services for licensed applicants. To facilitate business operation and to make good use of professional human resources, we will implement the RFE scheme. It will allow qualified professionals to offer the relevant services. This will provide an additional option for licensed applicants, and this will also provide flexibility. For examples, within working hours, fire safety risk assessments and certification services can be offered. This will speed up the application procedure, and this will facilitate business operation. According to the duties, there are 3 types of RFEs. First, RFE risk assessment. They will formulate fire safety risk requirements. The second type is RFE fire services installation. They are responsible for conducting compliance inspections, and upon confirming that the relevant requirements are met, they will issue fire safety certificates. The third type is RFE ventilating system. They are responsible for conducting compliance inspections of the fire safety requirements relating to ventilating systems, and they will issue fire safety certificates on confirmation of compliance. The RFEs will have to have the relevant professional qualifications and academic backgrounds in order to be considered competent. There are 3 ways for them to be registered. First, they have to be in fire sector. They have to have the relevant qualifications in fire building installations and so on. They'll have to have 1 year of relevant work experience. The second pathway, professionals who are not engineers, but they have the relevant bachelor's degree, for example, in civil engineering, structural engineering, mechanical engineering, or architecture, and they have 6 years of relevant work experience. For the third pathway, the applicants do not have relevant degree, but they can prove that they are competent and they have 15 years of relevant work experience. Based on the applicant's professional qualification or academic backgrounds, they may have to first complete certain recognized professional programs or courses, and they'll have to go through interviews before they submit applications. To adopt a prudent approach, we will have a phased implementation, considering that the fire safety involving food businesses are generally lower than other types of premises, and most of the applications we receive involve food businesses or food premises. So for the first phase, we will implement the RFE scheme in dealing with food business applications. The premises covered will include general restaurants, light refreshment, eateries, food factories, canteen factories, as well as composite food shops. This will allow relevant engineers to accumulate experience and professional knowledge. This will also allow the FSD to review the effectiveness of the scheme. For the first phase, after it has been implemented for a certain period of time, we will evaluate the effectiveness of the scheme, and depending on our assessment, we will consider extending this scheme to other types of premises.
In licensing applications of food premises, there were 3 steps in fire safety. Step 1, the FSD assesses the fire safety risks. This means looking at the layout of the premises, and then the FSD lays down the fire safety requirements and then sets out the rules, hoses, and also emergency directions, lighting, as well as ventilation systems. This is what we call part requirement. And then we come to step 2. The license applicants will arrange the installation of these devices and equipment. And then step 3. Once those works are done, the FSD checks the installations. If the devices are in compliance, we issue the certificate. Once this RFE scheme is in place, the HKFSD will continue to provide the existing services. But then for the license applicants, they can choose either to go for the FSD services or engage a registered fire engineer. Now, for the first step, it may take just 2 working days through a registered fire engineer, and then within the next 3 working days, the FSD will approve or endorse that step. Now, for step 3, meaning from checking to issuing the certificate, 5 working days will be enough. And that means when someone hires a registered fire engineer, they can reduce the number of working days involved from 34 to 8. Now, on the fees, we can illustrate the point with a place of 250 square meters in size. Now, if someone goes for the FSD services, that would cost $4,370. For someone hiring an RFE instead, the industry's estimate is that the cost will be $110,000 instead. At 5 different levels, the HKFSC will regulate RFEs. First, a rigorous set of requirements over qualifications and experience. We want people who can do the job to join the trade. And we will also issue codes of practice and guidelines, and they have to be followed to ensure consistency in work. All fire safety requirements will require endorsement from the HKFSD before those requirements can be given to the license applicant. The 4th requirement is that we will take a risk-based approach, and that means audit inspections for 70% at least for those premises. The HKFSD will also put in place a disciplinary mechanism for RFEs not doing their job. The FSD will set up a registration committee, and this committee will be made up of engineers, the FSD, and people from the academia. This committee will look at the operation and the qualifications, and then they will advise the Director of Fire Services. The FSD will also set up an interview board, and here there will be people from the FSD and the academia to interview the applicants who want to become RFEs. There will also be a disciplinary board. This means when an RFE is not doing their job, we will deal with those people, and then there will also be an appeal board. For the last 2 boards, the members will be appointed by the Security Bureau. The members will be people from the FSD and the trade bodies or relevant people from the academia. So that's all from me on the RFE scheme. Thank you. Now, the floor is open for questions from members on the policy matters. Here's the lineup: Mr. Stephen Ho, Professor Chow Man Kong, Mr. Andrew Lam, Dr. Wendy Hong, Mr. Chen Xiu Hong, Mr. Ring Kong, Mr. Tony Tse, followed by me. 4 minutes per member. Mr. Stephen Ho, thank you. You can be flexible with the time limit. Now, we did not have many questions at previous meetings, and now we actually got hold of more information after the briefing. We support this proposed regulation and we support the approach. But at previous discussions, there was no discussion about the fees, meaning it will cost $4,000 when people go for the FSC, and when you engage an RFE, it will cost $110,000. How did you arrive at the fees? And when you have more RFEs taking up the work, will there be a chance for lower fees? How did you arrive at the fee difference? At previous discussions, it also raised the point. Engaging in RFE will be costly for small and medium enterprises, and that may put SMEs off. So I guess most SMEs may stick with the FSD services. So how will the government convince the trade to try RFEs? I'm not asking for a subsidy, but I'm asking for some kind of pilot scheme for SMEs to try RFEs. I myself took part in ship surveying, and there were external engineers hired in the process. Those engineers were picky when it came to customers. Those engineers charged fees at different levels for different clients with wild differences, and they would turn away some customers. They would take the bigger customers. Of course, this is all market in action, but I don't want to see that happen with this RFE scheme. I would like to see SMEs accessing this scheme to access better services so that they can start their businesses sooner. So 3 questions for the Deputy Secretary. First, the fees. So the services provided by the FSD cost $4,000 or so. As for the figure of $110,000, that figure came from a consultancy study. The consultant estimated the number of people needed to perform the work. And the rough estimate of a cost for a registered fire engineer, and that's how they arrived at the figure of $110,000. So that's the cost for a restaurant with 250 square meters in area. And we have looked at the number of people who can potentially qualify as RFEs for risk assessment. There will be roughly 200 people who will qualify. As for fire service installation and ventilating system, there are roughly 2,000 people in each category potentially qualifying for those RFEs. So we have enough people in the market who can take up the work. Now, what about small and medium-sized restaurants? We are offering an extra option for those businesses to arrange the work. And this is the merit with our approach. There will be market competition, and restaurants will still have the option of coming to the FSD for the services. There will be publicity to go with our scheme. There will be transparency of information for people to make their choice. Chairman, a simple follow-up question. I wondered what the approach of the consultant was like. So is $110,000 the highest amount, or is it the lowest amount? And when you have more RFEs on the market, will there be changes to the fee? Will the fee go up or down? Now, if that amount comes from just a casual attempt at getting a quote, then that figure won't be very meaningful. So can we have some more details on how you arrived at that figure? That figure came from a consultancy study some years ago. Things may have changed in the meantime. Once you have enough RFEs in the market, there will be market competition. So the market forces will decide the fee. I believe the fees will be lower. So when was this study compiled? Any details on when the consultancy study was prepared? Deputy Secretary, you said it was many years ago. So around the time of the principal legislation. Assistant Director. We commissioned that study back in 2012. We took a number of factors into account. So we assumed hiring an independent contractor. We looked at their hourly rate. It was roughly $800 to $1,500 per hour for those independent contractors. And we also estimated the length, the time it would take to issue a certificate. It was roughly $1,000. So we went on the basis of a 250 square meter restaurant. The cost would be roughly $100,000 to $110,000. So that was the rate back in 2012. We don't see a major change in the rate in the meantime, so we believe this estimate still holds up. But this is more than a dozen years ago. I think that's a long time ago. Any follow-up question from Mr. Stephen Ho? No. That figure came from so many years ago. I would need some further justifications to show me that that figure is still reliable. It's unlikely that the rate has not gone up in over 10 years' time. I want more figures. So maybe after the meeting, can the government provide more supplementary figures? Can we get some figures closer to the market rate now? Professor Chow Man Kong. So this proposal is about making life easier for businesses. We want to save time for license applicants and also save manpower for the FSD. So in principle, I support this amendment exercise. Now, my first question is that there were 3 ways for people to become RFEs. So a retired fire services officer with an engineer's qualifications can register as an RFE. The Hong Kong Polytechnic University is the only institution offering a degree in fire service engineering, and there were 2 other universities. They will offer such programs in September, so I wonder what the latest position is like. Mr. Stephen Ho just brought up the fees, and this warrants attention. We're talking about a difference between $4,000 and $110,000. Unless your restaurant makes money hand over fist, you will stick with the FSD services. So what incentive will there be for people to opt for RFEs? Now, when someone makes a false claim about being an RFE in a certain category, and they can be fined $50,000 or be imprisoned for a year. Now, of course, it's very unlikely that someone posing as an RFE and go unnoticed by the FSD, but we're putting lives at stake when someone poses as an RFE, so can we have harsher penalties? So a few questions. Fees, how do we get people to use RFEs? And the last question is about fraud, people posing as RFEs. As Professor Chow said, there are 3 ways for someone to become an RFE. The first path is for registered engineers with 1 year of work experience. And then the second path is for people with the relevant degrees and 6 years of work experience. The last path is for industry veterans, people with 15 years of work experience, and also people who have completed recognized professional courses. Now, for the recognized professional courses, We know one tertiary institution offers such courses. The FSD also has plans to offer such courses. So there will be enough such courses on the market. Now, on someone falsely claiming to be an RFE, the penalty will be at a fine at level 5 plus imprisonment. Now, for someone posing as an RFE, it will be tough because we will have in place an electronic registration card for bona fide RFEs. And it will be very easy for licensed applicants to verify the credentials of someone claiming to be an RFE. The register of RFEs will be publicly available online. On the penalties, now under the Engineers Registration Ordinance, the penalty is also at level 5 or $50,000 plus 1 year of imprisonment. So we believe this penalty is appropriate.
And about incentives for the trade, I'll ask Mr. Yong to supplement. After the implementation of the scheme, we will do a lot of education work as well as publicity work. As mentioned, the service fees will be decided by the market. If we have many people registered as RFEs and with more choices in the market, I believe the fees will go down. If fees go down, more people will opt for RFEs, and we believe that will attract more license applicants to opt for RFEs. So this will depend on our publicity effort. As mentioned, to be a registered fire engineer, the people will have to take relevant, recognized professional courses. There are degree programs currently offered by some universities. For the professional courses, they are not like degree programs. So our department will offer module-based courses. Where necessary, we'll offer such courses so that more people in the trade will be able to become registered fire engineers. I am a consultant of a development company. Thank you. Mr. Andrew Lam. On the implementation details, I will ask the relevant questions when we come to that part of the regulation. I have a couple of other questions. I support the regulation. However, I'd like the administration to clarify a few things. Currently, in the market, we don't have the 3 proposed classes of RFEs yet. A lot of times, we have companies offering such services. The regulation targets registered fire engineers. And that does not rule out the possibilities of companies offering intermediary services. How do we clarify the relationship between agencies as well as RFEs? I think clients or potential clients will have to have the knowledge about this. Secondly, on RFEs, well, license applicants have the option to not opt for RFEs but use the services offered by the FSD. Will the FSD be regulated by this regulation as well? That means when the FSD issues licenses, will that have to be done by a registered engineer, or is it simply approved by the Director of Fire Services? Also, when the scheme is first implemented, the FSD will have a check on certain certifications. If it is found that there are mistakes made by an RFE, how would you deal with the situation? Would you adopt a rather lenient approach when the scheme is first rolled out? And how will you keep a record of that? Lastly, I think it's a comment. When the scheme is first rolled out, license applicants in the food businesses may not necessarily know how to distinguish the three classes of RFEs. Well, there will be different stages of work involved in a licensing procedure. I hope that you will step up your educational effort. I think you will talk to the food businesses about this. 3 questions and 1 comment. Administration. We understand that there are licensing consultants in the market. Their major duty is to offer a one-stop licensing application services. License applicants, they can opt for this procedure. A lot of times they're not very familiar with the laws and regulations, and they do not want to spend time on filling out all the application forms. So they outsource this to a licensing consultant. As mentioned, under the scheme, we're offering an additional option for license applicants, and we allow RFEs to carry out fire safety risk assessment as well as certification services. For licensing consultants, their role will remain the same. We understand that the public will need information about this, so we stress that through education and publicity, we will disseminate information to the public so that the market will know that there will be different channels for license applicants to complete the procedure. We'll let them know that the regional FSD services will still be available. We will tell the public about the registration regime for RFEs. We'll also tell the public the service fee levels of the FSD. We'll also come up with leaflets to send out the correct information and message to the public. Currently, the FSD, does it have to obtain a license to carry out risk assessment and certification services? Well, the scheme is for registered fire engineers, and the existing legislation has already empowered the FSD to carry out the relevant work. On the endorsement to be carried out by the FSD, I thank Mr. Lam for his support. Say there are discrepancies between our check results as well as the certification made by an RFE. Well, there will be a code of practice. So RFEs will be aware of the standards that they need to comply with. In case of irregularities, we will carry out disciplinary proceedings. We will ensure that future RFEs will be able to obtain certain level or standards in the future so that fire safety will not be compromised. Mr. Lam, just now you mentioned about licensing consultants. I expect that in future, licensing consultants may submit applications on behalf of their clients, and the service fees that they charge may be way higher than that charged by the FSD. Let's not talk about whether the fee level is reasonable. There may be a chance that such a service fee will go up. Well, when we start scrutinizing the regulation, I'll ask about the responsibilities of different parties, because currently the regulation does not mention about licensing consultants. Next, Dr. Wendy Hong. From the perspectives of facilitating business operation and from the perspective of leveraging market forces to boost efficiency, I support this RFE scheme. I have a couple of questions. First, there will be 3 classes of RFEs: RFE risk assessment, RFE fire services installation, and RFE ventilating system. Does that mean a license applicant will have to look for 3 types of RFEs? I understand that an engineer may have several licenses. This may make things complicated for users. We see a lot of redundancies in terms of the requirements for different types of RFEs. Should there be 2 classes of RFEs for fire services installation and ventilating systems? Can they be combined? Currently, you target 3 types of engineers. For example, with the relevant qualification, you need 1 year of work experience. And for those with a degree, you ask them to have 6 years of experience. And those without a degree, you ask them to have 15 years of work experience. And you also said that apart from the relevant qualifications, you may ask the engineer to take part in interviews. Well, will there be a chance for engineers to retake the exam if they fail the interview? Also, how many people under the FSD are currently processing the approval applications? 70% of the certification will be checked by the FSD after the scheme is rolled out. I think this is necessary for the initial phase of the scheme. Once the scheme becomes more mature, will you lower the threshold? Boosting efficiency is your first objective. And have you assessed whether this scheme will help save the manpower of the FSD? Also, food businesses or food business licenses will be covered during the first phase of the scheme. And when do you foresee that you will implement the second phase? A couple of questions, administration. I thank the member for the questions. We are proposing 3 classes of RFEs. RFEs for risk assessment, fire services installation, and ventilating system. In 2017, we amended the primary legislation, and members of the Bills Committee agreed that there should be 3 classes of RFEs. There are certain reasons for that. We've had in-depth discussions about these 3 classes of RFEs, and on their qualification requirements, the FSD had made detailed considerations. For RFE risk assessment, we asked them to have a higher qualification because the field is more specialized. As mentioned, there are about 200 people that meet the requirements to be an RFE risk assessment in the market. If we combine these 3 classes of RFEs, there will be a lot fewer RFEs for fire services installation and ventilating system. Now, we impose different requirements for RFEs for fire services installation and ventilating system. Say for electrical engineers, they can help check the fire services installation. This will provide more options for the market. As for the different work experience requirements, currently in the market, there are fire engineers. While they are not registered fire engineers, they can inspect the design of certain fire services system. They can also work on the maintenance as well as the repair of relevant systems. And we look at engineers' experiences in these. So we know that there are people with such experiences in the market. We will endorse the certification made by RFEs. we will check no less than 70% of the certification concerning fire services installation and ventilating system. In future, after the RFE scheme is rolled out for a certain period of time, we will conduct a review. Subject to the result of our review, we may consider rolling out a second phase. For example, we start with food business licenses now in the first phase. Depending on the result of our review, we will decide what we should do for the next step. The review outcomes will tell us whether we should adjust our threshold in relation to the 100% of endorsement and 70% of inspections.
Will that save manpower for the FSD? There will be much registration work involved. There will be committee work to support the RFE scheme. When there are violations, we will investigate the cases, and then there will be disciplinary proceedings as well. So that will mean extra work. As I said, we will do audit checks on 70% of the cases, and we will go through every single endorsement. So that will not mean a massive reduction in work. So once the operation of the new scheme becomes smoother over time, there may be less work. And we are taking on all that work with the existing resources. We're not requiring extra resources. If possible, we will deploy our manpower resources flexibly. Mr. Chen Xiuhong. Any measure to remove barriers, to make life easier for people and businesses has our support. Having said that, I want to make sure we do put safety first. So this is a resolution proposed under Section 25 of the Fire Services Ordinance. The goal is to provide an extra option for people. So more choice, that's good. Now, I see this flow chart here, and people may get this wrong. People have taken issue with the lengthy process involved when they want to get the FSD's approval, meaning the certificate. And people say this is a very rigorous process. Of course, that rigor is warranted because safety is at stake. Every now and then you see serious fires. Those fires are the last thing we want to see. That's why we need the FSD to be the gatekeeper here when it comes to requirements, when it comes to construction, maintenance, etc. With the RFE scheme, formulating fire safety requirements will take much less time, from 17 working days to 3 working days. And then the audit inspections will take a few working days instead of 17 working days. So I would like the government to explain that this scheme will save so much time. We want to know why the savings in time are so huge. Is it because the FSD is short of officers? That's why we're turning to the market? We don't want any quality issues. So I invite the government to explain the reason behind this proposal. I don't want the public to form the false impression that we're now after speed at the expense of safety. Now, when I add up the time involved from A through C, when you hire an RFE, you will need just roughly 10 working days. But then the final checks, the final audit inspections, once the RFE checks the fire service installation or ventilation system, at that point, the restaurant should start its operation right away. When the FSD performs the audit inspections, meaning you're doing 70% of those checks, the restaurant is already running. If everything is fine, the restaurant keeps running. But if the FSD spots something off, the restaurant should cease operation right away. I'm giving an opportunity for the FSD to explain how this works, to give the public a clearer picture. Now, for an RFE that's engaged by a license applicant, this RFE will be looking after the needs of this applicant. And that means the RFE will be dedicating their attention to this applicant's needs. So the RFE may even be working over weekends. Now, on ensuring consistency in standards, that goes back to the reason we are launching this scheme. We're launching the RFE scheme. We want to make sure safety is not undermined. We want consistency in standards when the checks are done. That's why we go through all the fire safety requirements before giving our endorsement, and we also check 70% of the compliance audits done by the RFEs. The value of the scheme lies in the time that people can save, but we're not compromising the standards. Chairman, this is a key point. The work that takes 17 working days now will be done in just a few days. So I want to drive home the message that we're not compromising safety. An RFE may work over the weekend, and some such engineers may get the work done in a day. But we have to make it clear that we're not simply after speed. We're not after speed at the expense of quality. So my question is, how do you make sure people don't compromise quality? So within those few days, there should be an assurance that the FSC can make sure you can maintain quality despite the speed. We don't want fire safety incidents purely because we are going after speed at the expense of safety. Chairman, I agree with the member. Now, on when we do the audit inspections, since we're just talking about 3 working days, the audit inspections will happen before the restaurant opens. When we choose a restaurant for audit inspections, we will perform the inspections as soon as we can. But the license will only be granted after the audit inspection is done. Now, once the RFE checks the installations, if the RFE is satisfied that the requirements are met, the RFE issues a certificate. At that point, the restaurant cannot open yet. The restaurant will still have to wait for the FSD's audit inspection. So while the restaurant is waiting, I wonder if the FSD can give us a pledge for this meantime, meaning once you receive that letter from the RFE, and then within 3 working days, the FSD must decide whether to perform the audit inspections. And at that point, the FSD must also let the restaurant know. That restaurant may have spent $100,000 on the renovations and preparations. Otherwise, you keep the restaurant waiting for another week, and that's no good. So I would like a clarification. So we will work at speed to arrange the audit inspections. Now, on the specific timeline, my colleague, Mr. Michael Yong, can tell us more. Now, we will be in touch with the licensing authorities. We get a letter from an RFE. After this RFE fills out the forms, and those forms go to the licensing authority. The licensing authority shares those forms with us. And then we will take no more than 3 working days in sending an officer to the restaurant. Now, the FST is just one among the many parties involved. Other parties, other departments are also involved. They have to give the green light before the license can be granted. So what we do here won't have a major impact on the time it would take for a license to be granted. I want to raise a point here. We have a provisional license. When a restaurant applies for a license, they go for a temporary license. At that point, the restaurant can open. Afterwards, within 6 months, other departments will keep following up on the licensing matter before the full license is granted. So what the FSD does has to do with the full license, not the temporary license. So that means the FSD's work will not affect the operation of the restaurant. Of course, we would like to see KPIs or key performance indicators. It took us much effort to secure the temporary license to be put in place. Different departments come together. They lay out the conditions for a licensing applicant to get the temporary license so that they can start running the restaurant. Any follow-up? No. So I call upon members to be mindful of the time limit. I would be flexible, but please allow time for the government officials to give you a reply. Mr. Rincon. I support any measure to make people's life easier. Top of mind for people is whether they are seeing faster processing and cheaper services. On speed, I welcome the performance pledge. But the FST will have to send officers to check. So the RFE does the work, and then the FST gives the endorsement. The audit inspections come later. So without the FSD's endorsement, no certificate can be issued. So can the government tell us specifically, an RFE does the work, and then the FSD gives the endorsement, will the entire process really be faster? On the price, I do have a question about the fees. There will be 3 kinds of RFEs: risk assessment, fire service installation, and ventilating system, and 2,000 people potentially qualify for these RFEs. Is there much overlap among these 3 groups of people? We don't know when the estimate was made. We expect overlapping tasks, and there will be people with more than 1 license. Of course, that's good for people because they can turn to a single person. But my question is, how many people can qualify for all 3 kinds of engineers, or how many people do we have who can qualify for 2 kinds of RFEs. Now, on faster services and cheaper services, our performance pledge for granting the endorsement is to grant it within 3 working days. Now, assuming an RFE gets the work done in 2 days, meaning they assess the risk in 2 days, and then we can give the endorsement within 3 days. So from assessment to endorsement, it will take 5 working days. Now, it takes 17 working days when everything goes through the FSD. So people will see a faster process once an RFE is involved. There will be overlapping in qualifications among the 3 kinds of RFEs. RFEs who perform risk assessment will also be able to perform the checks for fire service installations and ventilation systems. I don't have the specific figures, but I will see if Mr. Yong has those figures. As the Deputy Secretary said, there are roughly 200 people who can assess the fire safety risks. Now, for people who can do all 3 kinds of work, there will be 200 such people. Now, as for people who can only do FSI or VS, there were 2,000 people for each category. We don't have the specific figures, but there will be some overlapping. Now, if someone meets the qualifications, they can apply to become an RFE for just 1 or even 2 categories, or even all 3 categories. So we give that flexibility to the applicant.
Ms. Kong, any follow-up questions? All right, next, Mr. Tony Che. Thank you, Chairman. By leveraging the private sector, we can offer more options to people who need the relevant services, so I support the scheme. I have a question. The Buildings Ordinance covers the safety of building, including design, construction, as well as maintenance and repair. All these need to comply with relevant standards, and this covers fire safety, hygiene, and fire services installation, as well as building management, and so on. Understand that there are currently over 1,500 authorized persons under the Buildings Ordinance. How come this regulation does not cover these authorized persons, so that these authorized persons can obtain the relevant registration to be fire engineers under the scheme? Now, I'm looking at CAP 502, 572, and 636. I'm also looking at the building planning regulations. Authorized persons play an important role under all these legislations. In terms of building planning, design, and construction, it is the Director of Buildings that's responsible. And there are relevant improvement works that need to be carried out for buildings to ensure safety. Likewise, the Fire Services Ordinance impose certain requirements, for example, to ensure fire safety. Then how come there are no mention of, for example, authorized persons under this ordinance? Administration. We have professionals in architecture and buildings. They help formulate drawings, plans, They play an important role in terms of supervising building works. We have had an in-depth discussion about this scheme, and the Director of Fire Services will consider fire safety risk assessment as well as fire services installation and ventilating system. And we come up with a framework of different qualification requirements for the 3 types of RFEs. This is to ensure that RFEs have the qualifications required as they provide the services. In terms of building surveying, we accept those with relevant work experiences and qualifications to be registered as an RFE for all 3 classes. The relevant information is covered in our previous PowerPoint presentation. On registration, we will form a registration committee. For special cases, we refer them to the registration committee, and this committee will provide advice to us on an ongoing basis in relation to registration arrangements, and we will make reference to the advice provided. Chairman, we have engineers, surveyors, as well as architects who may meet the relevant qualifications under the scheme. If that's the case, how come authorized persons are not mentioned in the regulation stating that they may have the chance to become an RFE for civil engineering? I believe compared to its relation or the relation between authorized persons and fire engineering, there must be a closer relation between fire engineering and authorized persons compared to civil engineering. Well, in the previous discussion, I mentioned or I asked why architects are not covered. For authorized persons, if you are to revise any building plans, you have recognized personnel to approve the building plans. And in the past, the FSD relied on recognized personnel to, for example, supervise the relevant works so that the works meet the requirements. So the explanation offered by the administration is not clear enough. Why are you not including the recognized personnel in the scheme? Well, let me explain in greater detail. Fire engineers are professional. They have to be familiar with the design of fire services system, and they will have the relevant experiences in carrying out fire safety risk assessments. And recognized personnel, they may not necessarily have these experiences. While they may be very familiar with the building's laws and regulations, they may not have undergone the professional training in relation to fire services and fire engineering. So, objectively speaking, they may not be able to meet the requirements to be a registered fire engineer. Well, Chairman, Cap 95, the Fire Services Ordinance, states that recognized personnel plays a role in fire safety. They have to ensure that the fire services safety meet the relevant requirements. Does that mean recognized personnel will not be regarded as RFEs? Will you have to amend the ordinance accordingly then? Deputy Secretary, we ask the professional to have the relevant work experience to prove that they meet the requirements. As mentioned, we need professionals with work experiences in fire safety system design and so on. I'll ask Mr. Yong to elaborate what are the relevant work experiences required. Chairman, Well, of course, you'll need relevant work experiences for at least 1 year, 6 years, or even 15 years to meet the relevant requirements. Well, without such work experiences, it doesn't matter what titles you have. You cannot be an RFE. Administration, Mr. Yong. To apply to be a registered fire engineer, there are 3 ways to do so. First, you are a registered engineer. You are in the relevant profession, and we believe that you'll be able to do the work. For other types of people who want to be a registered fire engineer, they'll have the relevant degree. We look at what they study at universities to see whether they can meet the requirements. To give you a little bit more information, we've been in talks with the Institute of Architects to see what courses architects have to complete for them to get the degree. We look at whether architects have completed the relevant courses. So we're in talks with the relevant institute. As mentioned, there are 3 ways for people to become RFEs. Well, there is another way actually. People who have completed relevant courses or obtained relevant qualifications, and if the Director of Fire Services is of the view that these courses cover the relevant scope, then after the passage of the regulation, we will have the registration committee will have representatives from the academia sitting on the committee, and they may help assess the qualifications. If they meet the relevant qualification requirements, they may still apply to be an RFE. Well, I just have a few points to make. I thank the administration for talking to the architects. You have to think from the perspectives of the recognized personnel. They don't even have a role to play in the regulation. You allow people with civil engineering experience to apply to become an RFE. How come you're not covering recognized personnel? Well, I believe there needs to be more communication and publicity. Well, this is to think from other people's shoes. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Years ago, we passed the bill and we had an in-depth discussion about the legal framework. Those who can become an RFE under the scheme, they may come from various backgrounds, including surveying and architecture. Well, recognized personnel come from different backgrounds as well. But if you are a recognized personnel, it doesn't mean that you automatically become an RFE under the scheme. Well, you may assume that a recognized personnel can have the ability to carry out the relevant work. While I am not ruling out this option, I just feel that if you are a recognized personnel, if you want to become an RFE, you can follow the pathways provided to become a registered fire engineer. Those in management positions may not necessarily be competent to become an RFE. Well, I believe there's been communication between the administration and the relevant trade. At this stage, more communication, the merrier. In order to avoid misunderstandings, I think the administration need to clarify the following. For example, within 17 working days, the FSD will finish certain work and you'll give 1 to a few days for RFEs to carry out certain work. Well, does the 17 days cover waiting time? Well, does that mean within 17 days everything will be settled? Please clarify. Another thing that may cause misunderstanding is that if you ask the FSD to provide the services, it will cost $4,370, and if you engage in RFE, it will cost $110,000. Well, within the FSD, we have professional engineers approving applications. Then how come it only cost about $4,000 for the FSD to provide the relevant services? Please explain whether you are fully recovering the cost under the scheme. Now, you estimate that it will cost $110,000 to engage in RFEs. Well, this is a market-led approach. In future, the cost may be a lot lower. Well, food factories and factory canteens, the relevant safety requirements are probably similar. And for an RFE who has dealt with 1 case or 2 cases, he may be able to take up all other cases because the safety requirements may be the same. As to whether a lot of time will be saved, I think it is worth it from the business's perspective to engage in RFE because the earlier you get the license, the earlier you can make profit. And you may be able to recover the money spent on engaging in RFE. So what I want to say is that this is a market-led approach.
So a few questions, maybe more explanation is needed for the point about authorized persons and why the FSD needs 17 working days. The final question is about the fees, market fees. Dr. Low is familiar with how the FSD does its work. The 17 working days will cover waiting time because we cannot perform the work over weekends. The actual time we will take will be fewer than 17 days because we are factoring in the waiting time and the weekends. That's why you see 17 days, and that's why it appears to take so long. Now, on the fee, 4,370 days, our fees are set based on 2 principles, cost recovery and user pays, but then for legacy reasons, the fees are not set at a level that can recover the full costs. The last adjustment to the fee level was 2014. So this is actually now at a below cost recovery level. Now we cannot go for a full cost recovery level right away. Doing that will put pressure on the trade. Now, on whether we should dwell on the price tag of $110,000, once the scheme is in place, the market will show us what the fee level will be. Next, Mr. Tommy Chung. The adjustment to licensing fees before 2014 was 1998. That's why license applicants are better off with a licensing consultant. Some of my colleagues know authorized persons. For me, in the food business, people in my trade get into all kinds of problems. Authorized persons hesitate to sign off certificates because they don't want the liability. Paying those authorized persons does no good. Those people simply refuse to sign the certificate because they are worried about the future risks, the future liability as a result of signing the certificate. I think the fee of $110,000 is not far off the mark. So the current proposal is about giving people an extra option. The last thing I want to see is that 10 or 8 years down the road, we rely on RFEs alone, meaning the FSD no longer provides the service. That's my worry. So I just want this to be put on the record. The FSD should continue to offer this two-pronged approach, meaning both the FSD and RFEs can offer the certification services. Phase 1 will cover food premises, and then the scheme will expand in scope. The FSD will look at 70% of the papers signed by the RFEs. Let's say you have 5,000 applications for new licenses for food premises. Maybe only 4 out of the 5,000 food business license applicants go for RFEs. Then it would be meaningless if you just do the spot checks on the 3 cases, meaning 75% of the cases. So does the FSD have a goal in mind? Do you have a goal on the uptake of your scheme? RFEs may want more business, and because of that, they may charge lower fees. I would very much want food businesses to go for RFEs, but I don't want them to go for RFEs because they have no choice. That we should talk to not just the Institution of Engineers or the Institute of Architects, we should also talk to the universities offering engineering programs. Can we talk to universities offering programs that train up the people, and those people can go straight into the trade of fire engineers? So our principle is to offer services in parallel. The FSD will continue to assess risks and issue certificates, and then in parallel there will be FSEs. The license applicants will continue to have the choice. And then once this scheme is in operation for a while, we will review the scheme on whether we will change the extent of papers. We will check that. We will wait for a while before we make a decision. We do need to go over a number of cases before we can gauge the success of the RFE scheme. We will need market feedback before we can decide whether to go for the next phase. Now, on the fees, whether more RFEs will mean lower fees, we leave that up to the market. In the food business, there are licensing consultants. Those consultants build up knowledge after working on each case, and then they can apply the experience and knowledge to the next case. So for the RFE scheme, over time, professionals will build experience and then those fees may go down. Now, what about training and working with universities? The FST will remain in touch with the tertiary institutions to see if they can roll out such programs so that students completing certain programs can go straight into the stream of RFEs. I wonder if they're deliberately avoiding my question, and that is, say you have 5,000 food premises. Do you have in mind a certain level, a minimum level of restaurants who go for RFEs before they decide whether to go for the next stage? Say maybe only 50 out of the 5,000 restaurants hire RFEs. So does the FSC have a minimum uptake in mind? Mr. Yong can take the question. We don't have any hard and fast minimum level in mind. We don't have such hard and fast numbers. But we will see what happens. We will see how the scheme goes. We will double check 70% of the papers issued. So in the early days, maybe few license applicants apply for engage RFEs. When we have just a few cases, we may go through all those cases. What we want to know is whether the RFEs have what it takes to do their jobs and whether they are struggling with any problems. That's what we want to get hold of in the first stage before we move on to the next phase. We don't have any hard and fast criterion in mind because we want to leave things to the market. The FSD will continue to provide services on its side. When the RFEs in the market see people are deterred by the high fees, they may adjust their prices or fees, so that's the market at work. Any follow-up? No. Now I have some questions on two aspects. Audit inspections will cover 70% of the cases. That's from the paper. But then I also see audit inspections on a random basis. Random. But I've also heard that the audit inspections will also be based on the layout and also the fire safety risks. So I just want some clarification over the criteria to be adopted for these audit inspections. And will the FSC be able to double check the work done by all RFEs? Now I also have a question about the conflict of interest. An RFE cannot be the same person or an associated party of a contractor. But the trade wonders whether a restaurant owner can also be an RFEs. Will restaurant chains be able to hire in-house RFEs? Now we want to make life easier for businesses. Hiring an RFE for each restaurant within the same chain will be costly. So for a restaurant chain, they may want to hire a single RFE for the entire chain. Will that be allowed?
Well, how did we come up with the figure 70% on audit inspection? Well, we want to meet the target of 70%. we may not necessarily conduct inspection on a random basis. We will adopt a risk-based approach. We will not focus on certain RFEs. We'll ensure that the coverage is wide enough in terms of our audit inspections. Now, the question about conflicts of interest. Say an RFE helps inspect a fire services installation. And if the RFE also carries out risk assessment for a restaurant, then the RFE or the company concerned should not take up the inspection work for fire services installation. We've consulted the ICAC on this. This is to ensure objectivity, and this is also to avoid risks. On the other question, I'll ask Mr. Yong to supplement. Thank you. Say I run a restaurant myself, and I don't want to engage in RFE. I want to ask my staff to help carry out the compliance inspection. That's allowed, but you'll have to make the relevant declarations. You have to tell us that the owner of the restaurant or the staff is the engaged engineer. We'll definitely ensure that we will cover these cases in our 70% check to ensure fairness. Speakers off the mic. Chairman, your mic is off. At the meeting of the panel on security, the administration mentioned that since 2017, that is the passage of the legal framework, a lot of time has been spent on sorting out the implementation details. A major fire happened in the Grenfell Tower in the UK in 2017, and there were problems with third-party certification. And the inquiry panel in its investigation report said there are dishonesty and that's a systemic issue. And that's why the administration introduced amendments to the RFE scheme. I want to know what kind of amendments were introduced. And also, for the Phase 2 investigation report, are there any things that we can make reference to? Now, under the RFE scheme, there will be 3 classes of RFEs. License. Well, applicants can apply to be one class of RFE or more than one type of RFEs. The administration will set up a disciplinary board to inquire into cases where RFEs fail to discharge their duties. The disciplinary board may temporarily or on a permanent basis revoke the registration of RFEs. So whenever problems arise, the disciplinary board will investigate the issue. Say one registration is revoked, will an RFE with 2 other types of qualifications have the licenses revoked as well? Now, on the fire in UK, what kind of inspiration we got? Well, it has to do with the use of materials. On third-party certification, well, we drew reference from the investigation report. It looks like there were problems with the use of materials. and that caused the fire. I'll ask Mr. Yong to elaborate on the report. Now, on the point about the 3 classes of RFEs, I think it really depends. I think it depends on whether the disciplinary case involves an RFE with different licenses, and it also depends on the ruling of the disciplinary board. I believe the disciplinary board will set out its judgment, setting out and what consequences the RFEs concerned will face. Mr. Yong. Now, on the final report issued by the UK, it is similar to the initial report issued. It mentions about third-party certification of products, so it is different from the RFE scheme that we are going to launch. We insist that we are going to give endorsements to all the certificates issued, and for 70% of the certificates issued, we will carry out audit inspections during the initial phase of the scheme to see whether the RFEs are fulfilling their duties. Any follow-up questions? No? Mr. Tony Che. This scheme is to offer more options for consumers. If the services are expensive and not good, then you can opt not to use the services. Also, if you have the relevant professional qualification but you lack the relevant work experience, you will not automatically become an RFE under the scheme. I hope the administration will continue to talk to the Institute of Architects. Understand that surveyors, architects, and engineers are covered under the scheme. So the administration has sort of considered the authorized persons, because authorized persons are usually fall under these 3 categories of professionals. Well, I'd like to ask about the top-up courses. The Polytechnic University offers a master's program which lasts for 2 years for professionals. I think this is not very appealing. I understand that the FSD will roll out module-based courses. These are short-term courses that last for about 6 months. I hope that you can roll out these courses as soon as possible to encourage people to obtain the qualifications to become an RFE under the scheme. Also, I don't think you should charge a lot for the tuition fee in order to not put people off. Now, I support the phased implementation approach for the scheme. I hope that the administration won't wait for too long to carry out the assessment on the first phase, so that other types of premises will be covered under the RFE scheme. Well, do you have a target in mind on when you will finish the review of the first phase? The first question is about training courses. The second question is about how long it will take for you to complete the assessment of the first phase. Well, how many cases do you have to accumulate in order for you to carry out the assessment? Deputy Secretary. On training courses, the FSD will roll out the module-based courses as soon as possible. The launch of the module-based courses will coincide with the implementation of the RFE scheme. Now we will, in a steady manner, extend the scheme to other types of licenses. The uptake rate will also affect how long it's going to take for us to carry out the assessment and review. We will do the review as soon as possible, and subject to the outcome of the review, we will decide when we will roll out the next phase. Will there be a timetable? I'll ask Mr. Yong to respond. We'll have to see how things go after the first phase is implemented. On the 1st of November, this regulation will take effect. We hope that by the middle of next year, we'll be able to carry out a comprehensive review. And if the result is great, we will extend the scheme to other types of premises. Next, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Some members are concerned whether there will be enough registered fire engineers in the market. I was a member of the previous Bills Committee. I was also the former president of the Institute of Engineers. It is only with structural engineers that we can run a registered engineer scheme. So please rest assured that there are engineers in the market. Under the Institute of Engineers, there are engineers specialized in building services and installations. However, it did not become an engineer profession. Well, to become an independent engineer profession, we have to have certain favorable conditions. We need to have the relevant bachelor's program in Hong Kong offered by universities here. Also, we need to have enough training for engineers. We call it Plan A. And thirdly, we need to ensure that there are opportunities, that is, job opportunities in the market for engineers to serve the community. To ensure that there's an independent fire engineer profession, we need to fulfill all these conditions. So we don't need to be worried about insufficient supply of engineers. So fire engineers are only one small part of the industrial chain. There are currently engineers carrying out the relevant work. I am confident that the engineers in the market will be able to become registered fire engineers in the future. So we don't need to be too worried. I want to take this opportunity to give members such information so that we have a better understanding if you're not from the profession or the industry. Thank you. Administration, any response? I thank the member for the explanation. I don't have anything to add. We don't have any other members who would like to speak for the second round. Mr. Tony Che, third round. The FSD will roll out module-based courses as soon as possible. According to the administration, this is a good thing. I'd like to ask about teachers' qualifications. Are there enough teachers to teach these courses? Will FSD officers host these courses? Well, the figures offered have to do with the private market. We do not know how many qualified professionals there are within the government. Just now, members spoke about the significant difference between the service fees charged by the government as well as that charged by the private market. Will the government let the market decide on the service fee levels?
So 2 questions. 1, manpower. Second, fees. Very soon, later this quarter or in the 3rd quarter, the module-based training will come on stream. The preparations are underway. Much work is going on behind the scenes. Now, on instructors, the instructors will be the professionals from the Fire Services Department. So those officers will be teaching those courses. Chairman, will that add to the workload of the FSD's officers? Since the FSD won't be getting extra officers, I invite Mr. Michael Yong to tell us about their preparations. Now, on instructors of the courses, FSD officers with the relevant qualifications will be teaching the courses. But when it comes to courses on the law, we will also engage professionals from the legal sector to serve as instructors. Now, on the workload, indeed, there will be more work for our officers. We deploy our officers in a suitable way. We meet the extra workload through internal redeployment. We won't be hiring extra officers. So for specific officers, there will be more work for them. Now, follow-up questions. What about the fees? Can we find a way to narrow the discrepancy in the fees? There were questions on this point as well. What matters is that after the RFE scheme is in place, and since we have enough RFEs, enough people who can qualify as RFEs, and then we will leave it up to the market to set the fees. Now, as for the FSD's fee, we want to move towards the point of cost recovery in a gradual way. So gradually, we will reach the cost recovery level. So this is about bringing together a capable government and the efficient market. The final fee level will be set by market forces after this regulation is passed. Does any other member wish to comment or ask questions about the policy matters? If not, we are done with the discussion on policy matters. We now come to the section-by-section scrutiny of the proposed regulation. Members, please note that on the 13th of June, our legal advisor wrote to the administration on legal and drafting matters about the proposal. Members, please refer to CB Bracket 2 1250/2025/01. The administration has provided a written reply. That's CB Bracket 2 1279/2025/01. During our section-by-section scrutiny, will the legal advisor please also draw members' attention to the legal and drafting issues spotted so far? So we will first scrutinize the Chinese version of the proposed regulation. Members, please refer to CB Bracket 21104/2025/01. So we now invite Mr. or Ms. Rebecca Chung, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security. Will Ms. Chung walk us through the sections? If members have questions on specific sections in that regulation, please press the request to speak button. And if members have comments on the English text, please also press the button. Over to you, Ms. Rebecca Chung. I now draw members' attention to CB Bracket 21104/2025/01. So that's the paper I have here. So that's the draft regulation. There are 9 parts in the regulation. I will go through them part by part. First, let's look at Part 1 preliminary. So we have commencement and interpretation. First, commencement. So this regulation will come into operation on the date on which Section 5 of the Fire Services Amendment Ordinance 2017-1 of 2017 comes into operation. So we will first cover the food premises. Our goal is to launch the scheme on the 1st of November this year. That's why premises under the food premises regulation will come into operation on a date that is the 1st of November, a date to be fixed by the Secretary for Security. And as for other premises, the Secretary for Security will cause a notice to be issued in the Gazette for the commencement date for other premises. We now come to the interpretation. First, we have appeal board panel. Appeal means an appeal made under Section 52. An appeal board and appeal board panel refer to a board appointed under Sections 55 and 81 respectively. Now we need the definitions because there are provisions saying that someone aggrieved by a decision or order by the Director of Fire Services or the Disciplinary Board can appeal the matter to the appeal board. We will come to those in greater detail in a moment. We now come to the Engineers Registration Ordinance, that's CAP 409. We define this ordinance because provisions on registration refer to this ordinance. Now we come to Secretary, and that refers to the Secretary for Security. We now come to complaint. It means a complaint made under Section 39. We define the term because there are sections under this regulation referring to complaints about disciplinary offenses. We now come to identity documents, and they refer to an identity card issued by the Registration of Persons Ordinance or a passport, and also any other document of identity acceptable to the director for the purposes of this regulation. We define this term because there are provisions under the regulation requiring an RFE to notify the director when there's a change in their personal particulars. And now, required documents. Premises will need a license, a permit, or a certificate of compliance, or some other documents before they can open. As for a club, they will need a certificate of compliance. For schools, they will need a certificate of registration. Required documentation or registration, which means the different premises and the documents they will need before they can start operation under various parts of the schedule, and that refers to licenses, permits, certificates of compliance, and certificates of registration. And then we'll come to scheduled premises. They mean any premises used or intended to be used as an establishment listed in column 2 of part 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the schedule, and they cover licensed premises, restaurants, places of public entertainment, and schools, etc. Specified application in relation to any scheduled premises means an application for the grant or issue of a required documentation or registration that is made under enactment specified in column 3 of the relevant part of the schedule or opposite establishment the premises are used. Can we hold off for a moment? Mr. Andrew Lam has a question. A minor point. Specified application A1. It says relevant part. Is this the usual way you translate the word? Because I see the word part is capitalized. My colleague from the Department of Justice can tell us more about this. This is a drafting issue. In terms of presentation, part with an uppercase P refers to a part within a regulation. So here when we say relevant part, we are talking about a specific part. So you cannot replicate the same thing in Chinese. My question is that the convention, is that the usual practice? The Chinese sounds weird to me, and I wonder if that has anything to do with the capitalization. The member can read it this way. So in presenting different parts of a regulation, the first level is part, the second level is division. And in Chinese, when you use the word 部分, people may mistake that as 分部. Sorry, Chairman, I just have a simple question. When the Chinese phrase 有关一部, is that the usual translation? Is that the customary translation? Generally, yes. Any follow-up? No? Now, some housekeeping things here. Our meeting is supposed to end at 6:30 p.m. But I would like to cover specified applications, so I will extend the meeting for 15 minutes. So let's continue. Now we come to specified event. This means in certain circumstances, a member of the registration committee, interview board panel, disciplinary board panel, or appeal board panel may no longer be eligible as a member of such a body. So this member may be bankrupt, or it has entered into a voluntary arrangement under Section 2 of the Bankruptcy Ordinance, or this member is incapacitated by physical or mental illness, or this member is no longer suitable for the appointment, or any other reason that makes the member unfit for the body. Sorry, can we hold up a moment? Mr. Rincon. I think let's cover specified event and then we will adjourn the meeting. Mr. Rincon. Specified event as a term matters because it covers members of the registration committee, interview board panel, and disciplinary board panel. But I don't see criminal offenses set out anywhere from A to E. Let's say this member is convicted of fraud. So do we simply rely on E, meaning this member is otherwise unable or unfit to perform the functions? E is very broad in its scope. You can even cover a conflict of interest. So for a member convicted of a criminal offense, would that be covered by E? The administration, please. Thank you, Chairman. We will get to the appointment of the disciplinary board and appeal board. The composition of those boards will come with certain requirements. The Secretary for Security will appoint fit and proper persons from suitable trade organizations or the academia. So the Secretary will consider a basket of factors, and that includes the background and qualifications of a member before appointing that person to the committee. Mr. Rincon. I have read sections 41 and 73, but those sections are silent. I want to know, what do we mean by E, otherwise unable or unfit? We need some elaboration on this. So can the administration elaborate on this point? The Secretary will make the decision over appointing someone to those bodies. This can be the Secretary or the Director of Fire Services, depending on the situation. So those officials consider different factors when there is an integrity issue. or a member is convicted of a crime, the secretary or the director will consider that factor and make the appropriate arrangement, and that includes ceasing the appointment or asking that member to stop performing the duties. Any follow-up question? No. Mr. Tony Tse.
多謝主席。
I'd like to ask about D. It says the member has ceased to have the capacity by virtue of which the member was appointed. What kind of scenarios do you have in mind? Say we have a registered person, professional sitting on a board, and if the professional ceases to be a registered professional, that will fall under D. Administration. Say we appoint a member to sit on the disciplinary board. We will have non-public officers as well as nominees from academic institutions. A professional may be nominated to sit on the disciplinary board, and if the professional no longer have the professional qualification, we may remove that member from the board. Chairman, the administration said they may appoint a professional to sit on the board. Say the professional may come from a professional body. The professional may be a registered professional. If the member chooses to cease to become a member of a professional body, would that fall under D? Say if you are removed from a certain register, of course, you may be removed from the board. But if the person chooses not to become a professional, will that also fall under D? Deputy Secretary. We will have the registration committee. We'll need nominations from the registered engineer board. If the member ceases to be a member under the registered engineer board, we will consider whether that member is still qualified to sit on the registration committee. It's hard to give a fixed answer, but we will look at the member's capacity. Mr. Tony Che. Say you are nominated by a professional body, and if you lose the nomination, you may be removed from the board. If you lose the professional qualification, not because you are removed from the register, if you choose not to be a member of a professional body, or if you choose not to continue to obtain the professional qualification, will you still be removed as a member of the board? Anything to add? No, we will look at the circumstances on a case-by-case basis. We will continue from disciplinary board in the next meeting. We will carry on with the scrutiny of the regulation in the next meeting. We will talk to the administration in relation to the meeting date for the next meeting. There being no further business, meeting adjourned. Thank you.